friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Emily and this is where I love to talk about all the cozy, wholesome books that I love reading. Today we're going to be talking about some of the books that I read throughout the month of June. I actually read a decent amount of books. As ever, I don't count the number of books that I have read, so I will not be able to tell you the total amount of books that I read in the month of June, but if you want a little sneak peek, you can kind of see here on my notes app that all of those books were books that I read in the month of June, so it was a pretty solid reading month for me. A lot of them were rereads. I am somebody that tends to reread books almost to the same extent as I read new books, in that if I read 10 new books in a month, which is a lot, then I will often have also read 10 books that I've already read before. I love rereading books, and especially if I have a lot going on in my life or things are stressful or busy or whatever, there's that comfort of just reading a book that you already know how it's going to end and how it's going to go and all of that. So yeah, I have a few different authors that I really particularly love reading their books over and over again. Yeah, so it was a good month. I found a couple of new authors that I would love to read more books by them. The first one is Earl Stanley Gardner, and he is the guy that created the Perry Mason character in book series. If you're not familiar, apparently it's pretty famous. It's one of the top best-selling book series of all time. It's like number 3 or something. But yeah, he wrote a bunch of the books. I can't remember exactly when he started writing them or anything, but he wrote like a whole series. Like there's a bazillion Perry Mason books, and then there's the Perry Mason like TV series and stuff, so pretty famous, but I just had never really thought about it or read any of the books. So this month I tried out a couple of them and I did enjoy them. They were pretty good. See, I think I read 2 of them. I read 2 or 3 in June, and I really liked those, but then I had started trying to read another one and I didn't like it as much. Just the beginning of the book was just a little bit too stressful for me. I was like, you know what, I'm not like that attached to reading through the whole series, and the other part of the issue is that my library only had like 5 or 6 of the books in the series, and they were like really random. Like they weren't like the 1st or the 6th or anything. It was like, you know, the 1st and the 15th and the 23rd and the 5th, and I was just like, well, I'm one of those people that really likes to read a series in order, even if it's not necessary to read them in order. I like to read them in order. So I wasn't too bothered about trying to push myself to actually read them and read all of them. But I read a couple of them. They were pretty fun. They were good. They're kind of golden age mysteries. It was interesting in that Perry Mason isn't the detective. He's the lawyer that helps get his clients, prove that his clients are innocent. He's not getting them off of the murder charges because he wouldn't defend a murderer, but he is proving that they did not commit the murder. And then he has a detective associate that he works with. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It was a bit different than my typical golden age murder mysteries that I read. So I read a couple of those. I reread a couple of Ngaio Marsh books from the Roderick Alleyn series, the detective Roderick Alleyn. Oh, I love them so much. They're so much fun. They're so good. I read Artists in Crime, Death in a White Tie, and I always forget how to like pronounce it. It's a Surfeit. It's like I know how to do it in my head. Surfeit of Lampreys. So bad. But yeah, so I reread all of those. They were really lovely and fun, and dream goals to own all of the physical copies of the whole Roderick Alleyn book series. That would be so amazing. And then I read a couple more D.E. Stevens books. D.E. Stevenson. I read a couple more books by D.E. Stevenson. I read Mr. Rochester's Wife, which is something that it's one that I've wanted to read for quite some time. Part of that was just because it was a Mr. Rochester, and I absolutely love Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And so the premise kind of intrigued me because it was interesting for a D.E. Stevenson book that it was talking about how a young medical doctor is falling in love with the wife of another man. And I was just like, how is this going to go? Because D.E. Stevenson books so far, the ones that I have read, and I think I've read maybe 5 or so at this point, she definitely has a very strong like moral sense in her books, and her characters, the main characters, don't go around being floozy with other people's wives and husbands. So I was very curious to see how it was all going to play out and how it was going to work out, because she also, in all of the ones that I have read, has a really lovely happy ending. Like, her books are just so exactly the sort of things that I love to read, because they're just wholesome and lovely, have wonderful endings, and like I said, they have that good like moral sense to them, which I very much appreciate. So it was really lovely, just as good as all of the rest of the D.E. Stevenson books that I've read. Cozy, wholesome, wonderful, references to Scotland and all that fun stuff. So it was really good, so I enjoyed that one. Then I randomly picked up the book called Country Flirt by Joan Smith, and this one was just one that it was a suggested or similar title to other things that you've read from my library, and the premise kind of intrigued me because it was basically, it's like a Regency romance, kind of in the flavor of like a Georgette Heyer book. I think Georgette Heyer is a million times better of a writer than Joan Smith. But it was just kind of a fun sort of miscommunication, like, sort of a book. I enjoyed it. It took me it was a little bit of a struggle to get through it, or get through certain parts of it. And like I said, I vastly prefer the Georgette Heyer books that I've read. But when I got to the end of it, I didn't regret reading it. Let's put it that way. Because basically it's about this younger girl. I'm trying to remember her name now. This is the thing, like, I read books so quickly that half the time I forget like the names of the different characters. I can remember the summary and the plot most of the time. But it's pretty common for me to forget the actual names. But anyway, there's this young lady. She's technically a bit of an old maid because she's like 26 or something, I think, in the book. And this is Regency era, so she's kind of on the shelf at this point. And she's kind of always been in love with this rich gentleman who grew up in the neighborhood. His mom lives in the neighborhood, and they've been kind of thrown together off and on because there's not very many eligible men in the area. You know, like that sort of a trope story. And then his rich uncle comes back from India and starts flirting with this younger girl, and he keeps talking about how he needs to get himself a young wife so that he can have lots of kids and like do all this stuff. And he talks about like he's got so much money to spend and he's super rich. And so then the rich guy's mom the eligible bachelor's mom is like, oh no, like we can't just let this rich uncle get married because then all of the money will go out of the family, like we need to keep it in the family. And so she's trying to like keep the rich uncle from getting married or giving anything away or whatever, because she's just like, we need all the money even though they're already fairly wealthy. And so it was just kind of this whole thing, because then the eligible bachelor realizes that he doesn't want the young lady to marry his rich uncle because his rich uncle is super old, and he's just like, ugh, that's weird, like, no, don't get married to him. And so it was one of those things where it was like, you know, in the end, it's like everything all works out, and the rich uncle doesn't marry her, and she gets with the guy she loves, and one of those books. So it was fun. It was a bit silly at times. I think the rich uncle was just like so over the top, where he'd just be like, "Oh, I have hundreds of millions of monies, and I'm gonna like build this huge palace and have a yacht out on the bay and like do all this stuff." Like it was a little bit silly from that point of view, but it was pretty fun. I was not intrigued enough to go and try and read some more Joan Smith books, but I didn't regret reading it. So there you go. Hold on, my phone went to sleep. And then I read a bunch more of the, not a bunch more, was it just two? I read the next two books in the Mrs. Pollifax series. I thought for sure there was another one, but I guess not. Yeah, it looks like I just read two of the Mrs. Pollifax, because then I was waiting for the next one to come in from the library. That's what it was. Which it just came in like yesterday, I think, so now I can read that one, which will be fun. I'm really close to the end of the series, which is so sad. I think I'm down to books 13 and 14. I think there's only 14 books in the series. So we're getting right to the end of it. I read Mrs. Pollifax Pursued and Mrs. Pollifax and the Lion Killer. And yeah, they were just as good and wonderful as the rest of the books in the series. I've mentioned them multiple times in my videos at this point, but it's the story of Mrs. Pollifax, who is an older lady, and she goes and volunteers at the CIA to be a spy, and they end up being able to, they need her to be a courier, I think it is, in the first book. And then after that, the rest is history, as they say, where she'll randomly get a phone call or somebody will show up on her door and be like, "Hey, we need you to do this." Super simple, like no big deal, nothing major gonna happen, mostly pretty safe. You're probably not in much danger, we think. But it'll be fine, like it's all good, don't worry about it. And then of course, every single time something happens and something comes up and it's this adventure, and I really enjoy them because she's a very competent main character. My husband and I talk about this quite a bit, where she's not like this young, like knuckle-headed idiot that keeps doing stupid things and you're just sitting there going, "Why are you so dumb?" She's a very smart, intelligent, classy, wonderful older lady, and she is very good at like reading people and judging situations. And it's like, yeah, she makes mistakes and things go awry, but she never, you never are worried that she's gonna like do something super stupid or lose her head completely or whatever, and you know that she's gonna like pull things together and it's gonna come out okay in the end. And I really appreciate the fact that, yeah, that she's a competent older character, and that they're a little unrealistic in that some of the things that happen, you're just like, that's just too coincidental. But I appreciate that, because then I don't have to stress about it. Everything's gonna be fine. Everything's gonna work out perfectly in the end. And so that's one of the things those are some of the things that I very much appreciate about the series, is that they're just fun. Like they're fun, and like, you know, stuff happens, like murder happens and sad things happen or whatever, but they're overall fairly wholesome, if I could say that. They're just, oh, I really enjoy them. I'm going to be sad when I'm done with the series. But anyway, then I read another new to me author. This one was one where I think it was, I get books from my Libby app through my library, my local library, and I'll send them to my Kindle. And so I think there was one time when I was sending a book to Kindle on the Amazon thing. It had like a suggested book, and it was like a Prime reading book, because apparently there's like Kindle Unlimited that you can do, and then there's also Prime reading, where if you are a Prime member, you can read some books for free. I didn't know this was a thing, but apparently it's a thing. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll try out this book, because it was just another, I think it was like a clean romance or something was what it was described as, and I was like, okay, cool, like this seems to be kind of a clean historical romance. And it's Sensibly Wed by Kasey Stockton. And I really enjoyed it. It was one of those like marriage of convenience sort of tropes where young lady, young man caught in an accidental compromising situation, and so they get married to protect the family name, but then they also kind of make a commitment that they are not going to be completely married until 6 months after the wedding, to prove that they were not doing anything appropriate before they got married. And so it's kind of the story of, there's again some miscommunication, there's some anger from his mom because she thinks that the young lady intentionally tried to trap her son into marrying her, and all of that. And so it was really sweet and wholesome, and nothing like super big and major happened in it. It was just a lot of just the relationships between people, and her husband falling in love with one another and developing their relationship. And I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it. I'd really like to read the rest of the books in this series, because I think it's one of those things where there's 3 brothers, and so I think there's the series is each one of them finding a wife, basically. And yeah, it was really good, really wholesome and lovely. One of the things that like mildly annoyed me initially was they kept talking about how it was so vitally important that they honor the family name and protect the family name and they live up to the family name. And you know, in my modern day brain at first I was like, but people are more important than a family name. And then I started thinking about it a lot more, and I was just like, you know, there is actually the thing where if we collectively as a society, we're all taught to honor our family name, there are a lot of mistakes and stupid things that probably wouldn't have happened. Like, I can say that for myself for sure. Like, if I had been more intentional about, you know, living up to my family name and not doing anything that would bring dishonor to it, that there were some mistakes that I would not have made. And so I was like, you know what? That's actually not a bad thing to think about. And teaching my kids, my husband's and my kids, that there is an element of like, it's good to be proud of your family name and to not want to dishonor it. I think it has definitely gotten taken to like extremes. But I was like, okay. And so like once I kind of had that thought process, it didn't bother me anymore. Yeah, so that was a really fun book. Like I said, I would really, really love to read some more books by Kasey Stockton and read some of the rest of the books in the series. But I just have to get my hands on them, and I think that they were not available at my library and only available, I could only find them through Kindle Unlimited, and I don't have Kindle Unlimited. At some point I'm planning to sign up for like the free 30-day trial or whatever for Kindle Unlimited, because there's been a bunch of books that I've seen on there that I would really like to read, but I just haven't done that yet. And then I started rereading Patricia Wentworth. Miss Silver is just... I'm actually reading one of her books now. I love this series so much. This is one of the authors that I was mentioning in the beginning, that I can reread her books multiple times. Like when I can't remember if it was last year or the year before that I first discovered Patricia Wentworth, because I was watching Miranda Mills and she talked about the Chinese shawl, and that was the first one that I ever read, and then I just immediately fell in love with Miss Silver and the whole series, and I just devoured all of them. It was so good. Well, then I'd read them kind of at the beginning of the year, and so then by the end of the year I ended up rereading like most of the books in the series again, so I read most of the books twice in one year. And then I haven't read them, I think, since last fall or something. And so then I was like, oh, I just wanted to read a Patricia Wentworth book. And so I've been rereading books in the Miss Silver series, and they're so good, and I just so highly recommend them. They're Golden Age murder mystery books, and Miss Silver is an elderly lady who used to be a governess, and she has since been able to shift into becoming a private detective, and she solves problems and saves people's lives, and she knits the whole time. She does her knitting throughout the whole process of solving crimes, and I just love her so much. Oh, I cannot recommend her highly enough. And again, these books, they do tend to have like a higher moral tone to them, in that it's like, you know, having good manners, being respectful, like Miss Silver as a governess. These are the things that she was always teaching the young kids, and so she herself has a strong moral sense, and I just so appreciate that. It's something that I aspire to just. Anyway, I love them. I've been rereading them. I have read them, a bunch of them, and could not recommend it highly enough. And then the last book that I'm quickly going to talk about is actually another D.E. Stevenson book. And I have the physical copy. It's right over there on the shelf, but I don't think I'm going to go get it. I'll just put a picture up for you. And it is Miss Buncle Married. I finally finished that one. It took me such a long time. It's so frustrating to me because it's taking me so long to read physical books, even if I love them. It just takes me a long time to read them, whereas with my Kindle, I can, I do a lot of knitting, and so I can just have my Kindle sitting on my lap while I'm doing knitting, and I can just click through the pages, and it's super easy, and then if my toddler comes running over and wants to grab it, like I can just turn the Kindle off, and it's fine. Like, he can't steal it and crunch up the pages or whatever. But I have some books of physical copies that I own that I really want to like slowly read through. And so one of them is Miss Buncle Married, and I read Miss Buncle's book I think a couple years ago now, and then I've been meaning to read Miss Buncle Married ever since. I loved it. It's so good. This is what I'm saying, like D.E. Stevenson is probably is rapidly becoming one of my top all-time favorite authors, because her books are just, they're very kind of slice of life style, and that usually, again, like nothing major happens, nothing really like drama-y or crazy happens. They're usually just stories about people with a romance involved, which I so appreciate. That's one of the reasons I love the Patricia Wentworth Miss Silver book so much, is because there's always some young couple that is caught up in this murder mystery, and Miss Silver saves the day, and they're able to be married and live happily ever after and have their kids in their cozy little home. I love that, where it's like the romance isn't the like top priority front and center. It's more the relationships between the people, but there's romance on the side, and I just, it's so wholesome. And so that's how it was in Miss Buncle Married. Basically, Barbara Buncle, well, she's not Buncle anymore. What is her new last name? I can't remember it. Barbara and her husband decided to move house, and so she has to go, she's going and looking and trying to find a house, and she finally finds this house, and it's, she goes through it, and she's just like, oh my goodness, this is the perfect house, it's beautiful, we can make it like the coziest little home, and it's pretty like decrepit and run down and filthy and gross, and so like she brings her husband to look at it, and she's just like, isn't it gonna be perfect? And he's kind of like, ah. But he buys it for her anyway, and so they get the house, and so then she spends all this time like fixing it up and making it this perfect cozy home, and like some of the descriptions of some of like the house stuff, I'm just like, oh. It was just so lovely. But then yeah, it's just kind of that cozy English village life where there's different villagers that they meet and all of that, and it's just, it's such good fun. So cozy and wholesome, which I've said a million times, but lovely, lovely book. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend D.E. Stevenson if you have not read any of her books yet. I've seen that there's several of them on the Kindle Unlimited, and so that's, again, part of the reason I want to do the Kindle Unlimited thing. But yeah, so I think that that's all the books that I'm going to talk about that I read in June. I wanted to briefly mention 3 physical books that I would love, 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 love to work on reading either in July or throughout the rest of the summer. And they're all by Rosamund Pilcher. And I have so far only read one Rosamund Pilcher book. I think it was called The Empty House, which is another one of her shorter novels. Her very like long, super famous, sweeping books, like The Shell Seekers, I think September, and Coming Home, maybe that's it. They intimidate me a little bit just because they're so big, and I've heard some of them described as like a sweeping family saga, and sometimes I love that type of book and sometimes I don't. I'd like maybe like the shorter, more concise, like focusing in on like one family time period sort of a thing rather than one that goes through a bazillion years. So I've been a little intimidated by them. I own copies, I think, of all 3 of those that I mentioned. And I would like to read them at some point, but I kind of want to ease into it. So I have been able to pick up a few Rosamund Pilcher books recently. I mentioned it in my used book, secondhand book haul video that I just did, that I had gotten 3 of them, and then I was able to pick up 2 more since then. And so I have these 3 that I would really, really like to read this month or in the next bit. The first one is Snow in April, which is one of the ones that I mentioned in my previous book haul video. And then I have The Blue Bedroom and Other Stories, which is a collection of short stories, which I heard about this one from Jen, from Jen's Reading Life. Someday I will not second guess myself. And she talked about how she absolutely loved it and highly, highly recommended it. And I love short stories. I don't know what it is. Like, I really enjoy short story collections. I feel like it gives me a good taste for what an author's writing is like without having to, again, like, dive into a whole sweeping saga of a novel. It gives me like those bite-sized bits and you can be like, oh, okay. So I think this is the one I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with the short story collection and read through that. And then I also got The Carousel, which I believe this is the one that I saw recommended by, I follow her on Instagram. I'm completely blanking on the name now. But she talked about that it was, I'll put it on the screen here. Rebecca Wilson? That might be what it is. She posted about this book and talked about how it was a very sweet, wholesome, lovely story and there was no love triangle. And I love that. I do not like love triangles. One of my younger sisters does some writing and she talks about how much she loves doing love triangles because there's the whole like drama that you can do with that and it's fun to write. As the reader, I do not like love triangles at all. It is one of my pet peeves when that's like one of the main focuses of the story where there's this like super drama-y love triangle. Ugh, dislike that. So it was a very, very high point in this book's favor that there was not a love triangle to have to deal with. So, but yeah, so these 3 are 3 of the Rosamund Pilcher books that I would really love to get into because I have a feeling that she's going to be kind of like a D.E. Stevenson or a Patricia Wentworth, that I'm just going to absolutely love her books because the book that I read, The Empty House, I think that's what it was called, was so lovely and sweet and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so I just have a feeling that that's going to be the case and I need to do it, but we'll see. That is all that I have to talk about today. I hope that you enjoyed. I'd love to know, what was your favorite book that you read in June? Like, did you have a really solid favorite book that you found, or was it just kind of a meh reading month for you? Do you have any books that you're super looking forward to reading in the next bit throughout the rest of the summer? I know a lot of people are talking about all the summer books and stuff, which reminds me, I would really love to do a summer reading recommended books for summer. I meant to do that on the first day of summer and it just didn't happen. But anyway, I'd love to know if you have any books you're looking forward to reading this summer. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!